All right, Jabal, say good morning, a good mayid. Baruch Hashem, a great zuchos to be able to continue Mirza Hashem in Bava Basra before we get to today's daf, thanking our sponsors, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tafshin Pei Hey, the Tolson family for dedicating all the Shirman Drashos this month as a schos for Besoros Tovos for Am Yisrael, and Meretz Hashem B'Shal Tov Mitzlachas. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for Tishrei, Dr. Linda Weinberg, in memory of her husband, Peretz Moshe ben Avram David, Avram and Shane D. Kelman, in memory of their parents, Jerome and Bernice Kelman, Alexander Frederica David, and our Daf Yomi sponsor for today, Eric Schaefer, in the merit of a refuah shalema for the loved ones in our lives. Beautiful. We hope in Meretz Hashem, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, all of those who need a refuah should have one together. With Kol Cholei Yisrael, our hostages should be returned b'shalom and b'karav, and our soldiers should be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedehem. But with that, let us begin. A lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, a really great daf ahead of us, a really excellent couple of days ahead in Meretz Hashem. So we are picking up, today's daf is Kuf Yud Tes 119. We are picking up on Kuf Yud Chesem Beis 118b, second line up from the bottom. Kra Michael Rosh is supposed to remember again, still a little bit in the topic of Benos Tzlafchad, and specifically the Gemara trying to figure out over here. Remember, let me give you just the background. We're still in the midst of our three-way machlokes, which is how is Eretz Yisrael divided up. So remember again, we have Rabbi Yoshia, who says that it was divided up amongst Yotzei Mitzrayim, those who left Egypt. We have Rabbi Yona's son. It was divided up amongst those who entered into Eretz Yisrael, but with the retroactive allocation. And then there's Rabbi Shimon Elazar, who says it's both. Both, whichever group you were a part of, that entitled you ultimately again to a portion in Eretz Yisrael. So that machlokes is still kind of looming in the background. But now we're focusing a little bit more on the pasuk that was speaking about the fact that Menashe received 10 portions. Chavlei Menashe Asara, right? That there were 10 portions. So we're trying to figure out what's the nature of those 10 portions. So I'm going to popular by Kra Maika Chashiv. What is the pasuk? When the pasuk is talking about what Menashe got, what is it referring to? Eat falim kachashiv. If it includes even the portion that would technically be allocated to children, then tuvahavu. Then ultimately, again, there would be many more portions. I bate avos. If it was just referring to the families, that bate avos kachashiv shisahavu. Then there would only be 6. Top of Kuf Yutes 119a. Liolam bate avos kachashiv. Really, the pasuk is only reckoning the families of Menashe. The hakamashman the menos tzlavchad not lu. But rather it's going to teach us that what? That the daughters of Tzlafchad also not only received the portion of their father, Tzlafchad, but also, remember again, the Mishnah already pointed out that Tzlafchad was a Bechar. He was a firstborn to his father, Chefer. And as such, the Gemara is highlighting over here that Benos Tzlafchad also got their father's double portion. So not only did they get their father's actual portion, but they got their father's Bechora portion. Alma, Eretz Yisrael Muchzekes. What do you see from here? You see that Eretz Yisrael Muchzekes. Now Muchzekes means that Eretz Yisrael was the property even of those who left Egypt. In other words, the fact that Benos Tzlafchad, or the fact that Tzlafchad got a double portion in Eretz Yisrael. Now again, remember, Tzlafchad never entered into Eretz Yisrael, and who else never entered into Eretz Yisrael? His father, Chefer. So how is it that Tzlafchad is getting a double portion in Eretz Yisrael through his father? The only way to explain that is because it must have been that Eretz Yisrael was allocated to Yotzei Mitzrayim, to those who left Egypt. Incredible. Aramar, va'abanim natlo b'schos avi avihem. So remember again, the Gemara now is referencing back over here to the children of Korach, and the complainers. So remember again, they themselves did not receive a portion in Eretz Yisrael, but the children who, let's say again, did not do anything, although they did not have a portion from their fathers, they had a portion from their grandfathers, paternal grandfathers or maternal grandfathers. But the Brisa says that these children had their own portions in Eretz Yisrael. Lokashia hakamanda amar liyotzi Mitzrayim hakimanda amar lebaya aretz. Okay, so this goes back to the machlokas. So if you hold that the land was allocated to those who entered into Eretz Yisrael, so even the children of the Mislonim, even the children of the complainers, they were entitled to their own portion by dint of entry into Eretz Yisrael. But if you go with the idea that the land was allocated to Yotzei Mitzrayim, to the Jews who left Egypt, then although they did not get a portion from their fathers, they were zocha to get a portion from either their maternal or paternal grandfathers. V'baisim, the other possibility is havahala baya aretz. It could very well be that both prices, both statements are referring to the fact that those who came to Eretz Yisrael got a portion below kashya hada hava ben esrim hada lo hava ben esrim, and it could very well be that it was dependent on the age of the child. Although the Rashbam points out over here it couldn't have been children, rather it has to be referring to grandchildren. But okay, that's a detail. In other words, there's no way that there were children of Korach or children of the Meraglim who were under 20 upon entry into Eretz Yisrael. That wouldn't make sense. Chronologically, it doesn't make any sense. So it must be referring to grandchildren. Okay, either way, the point the Gemara is making over here is that Lamaisa, no matter how you understand the allocation took place, whether it was to Yotzei Mitzrayim, those who left Egypt, or to those who entered into Eretz Yisrael, we could reconcile all of these different braisos. So according to the second approach, you could go with the idea that the land was allocated to the Jews who entered into Israel. And again, it depends on what age they were upon entry. If they were above the age of 20, they got their own portion. If they were below the age of 20, they did not get a portion. Okay, or at least did not get a portion on their own. So remember again, back to Mishnah. So the Mishnah said, Tzlavchad was the firstborn. So just to point out again, so our overarching machlokes about how the land was divided, that machlokes still has not been resolved, right? That's still hovering around, and that's going to really shape our conversation going forward. So now remember again. So the Mishnah said that Tzlavchad ultimately again was a firstborn, and because he was a firstborn, therefore again he was entitled to a double portion in Eretz Yisrael, and therefore remember again, Benos Tzlavchad got their father's double portion. The Gemara says, but why? This is incredible. We actually had this last week. So remember again, we saw this already before Sukkot. We saw this in last week's daf. This concept that a Bechar, a firstborn, gets double portion. But what does a firstborn get double portion in? What we call muchsak and not roy. Meaning what? As a firstborn, you get a double portion in what is actually owned by the father, not by entitlements. So I'll give you just like the simple example of this. You know, if Yaakov died, Yaakov's the father. Yaakov died, and Yaakov has a son, Ruvain. Yaakov has a loan that is due to him in a year from now. So Ruvain, the firstborn, doesn't get a double portion in that loan, right? He doesn't get a double portion in that money that's coming in, because that money is roi. It's designated. It's going to come in, but it's not here. The only thing that a firstborn gets a double portion in is estate property that is owned by his father at the time of the father's death, right? So like say for example, investments that may mature sometime later on. A Bechar does not get Pishnaim, he doesn't get double portion in that. He only gets double portion in what is owned by the father at the time of his death. So the Gemara says something very interesting. So the Gemara says, why would Tzlavchad be entitled to a double portion in Eretz Yisrael because he was the firstborn to his father Chefer? After all, remember again, if anything, that portion in Eretz Yisrael for Chefer was roi, it was owed, but it wasn't actually owned, right? It wasn't actually possessed. So why would Tzlavchad get a double portion in that? Rabbi Shmuel, there's an incredible B'Yisedos Oalim. You're right. Tzlavchad didn't get a double portion in Eretz Yisrael. Rather, what did he get a double portion in? What did he get a double portion in? Literally translated, the stakes of the tent. Meaning, what it means is he got the double portion ultimately again in metaltalin, in property. In property, what happened? So B'Pashtus again, the Chefer had a tent, Chefer had possessions, right? They left Mitzrayim with possessions, so that when Chefer died, Tzlavchad got a double portion in his father's actual property. It's not referring to a double portion in Eretz Yisrael, because the double portion in Eretz Yisrael, that's roi. That's going to come later on. That's not owned at the time of Chefer's death. Rather, what does he go out and get a double portion? And literally again, Chefer's tent. I will say, I just want to point out to you how incredible this is. It's the Yom Tov of Sukkot, right? So remember again, why do we have the Yom Tov of Sukkot? So it's machlokes in the Gemara. One says Anani HaKavod, right? One says that we were surrounded by clouds of glory, and the other opinion says Sukkos Mamish, that we lived in huts, we lived in tents. So you see what's happening over here? On Sukkot, the Gemara is talking about over here that what did Tzlavchad inherit from his father? He inherited the tent. the sukkah of Chefer, incredible. The sukkah of Chefer. So he didn't get a double portion of Eretz Yisrael, he got a double portion in the Metaltalin, which again was the tent, the sukkah of Chefer. Absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. Massive Rabba, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, B'nos Tzlavcha, Notlu Dalit Chalokim Shneimar, Vayiplu Chevle Minasha Sarah. But also here's the problem. Rabba says as follows, that we said before that the daughters of Tzlachad got 4 portions in Eretz Yisrael, which indicates that Tzlachad as a Bachar had Pishnaim, had a double portion in the land itself. So that means as a Bachar, he didn't inherit in the land. Rabba says Eretz Yisrael muchzekesi. This is absolutely beautiful. So Rabba said you have to say that Eretz Yisrael is muchzak, not ra'oi. In other words, the claim that a Yid has to Eretz Yisrael is not ra'oi. It's not something that's designated, right, or going to come in the future, but rather it's muchzak. And the portion of Eretz Yisrael was considered to be actively owned. This is incredible. So if you go with the idea that the Jews who left Egypt had a portion in Eretz Yisrael, that portion was considered to be already owned even before we ever entered into the land. So therefore, again, at the time that Chefer dies, Chefer is considered to have owned his portion in Eretz Yisrael, and as such, when Chefer dies, so Tzlachad inherits a double portion of Chefer's property in Eretz Yisrael. Incredible. So we'll say, so again, so 2 possibilities. Either when we say that Tzlachad got a double portion, he got a double portion in Chefer's metaltalin, his movable property, like his sukkah. Yeah, he inherited the canvas sukkah, the schach mats, the decorations, right? He inherited his sukkah, double portion of his sukkah. Or, no, Eretz Yisrael is considered to be muchzak. See, Eretz Yisrael is not roi. Portion of Eretz Yisrael is not something that's designated to come, but rather it's considered to be actively owned presently. Incredible. So the Gemara goes right there. Meisvei Rabbi Chidka. So Rabbi Chidka says as follows: Shimon Hashikmuni Hayali Chaver. So this is a beautiful Gemara. So Rabbi Chidka says as follows: Shimon HaShikmoni, he was my friend, and he was also mitamidei Rabbi Akiva. He was one of the students of Rabbi Akiva. V'kach Hayar Rabbi Shimon HaShikmoni Omer. As Rabbi Shimon HaShikmoni used to say, Yodea Hayar Moshe Rabbeinu Shebenos Tzlav Chad Yarshosin. So we'll say here's what's interesting. So remember again, the way that the section, the story of Benos Tzlafchad is written is that these women approached Moshe Rabbeinu, right? And they said, our father died. He wasn't part of Adas Korach. He wasn't one of the Meraglim. He was a good guy. He died. He doesn't have a son. Why should we lose out on his portion? So Shimon HaShikmoni said as follows: Moshe Rabbeinu knew that the daughters of Tzlafchad were going to inherit. That wasn't the shayla. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu knew the halacha was that where there is no son, a daughter inherits. What Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't sure of was, do they get their father's double portion? So that a daughter inherits when there is no son, that Moshe Rabbeinu knew. His shaila was, does a daughter get her father's double portion? Because of Ayadei Moshe. And the truth is, this parsha, this section of inheritance, should have really been written through Moshe. In other words, instead of being written as a story, right? That Benos Tzlafchad came to Moshe Rabbeinu should have come along and just written this halacha just as a straight out halacha. So what happened? So the Gemara says, Elo shezachu b'nos Tzlafchad v'nichtava al yadan. The daughters of Tzlafchad were zocha, right? They had the privilege that this section of the Torah was written through them. I was both saying, so these women were so righteous that the way this section is written in the Torah is, it's written as their story. They came to Moshe, asked the question, and the story is recorded like that. Furthermore, so we'll say, so therefore again, the Gemara is suggesting over here is that halacha l'maisa, Moshe Rabbeinu knew, in other words, the halacha was known that if a father dies without sons, that his daughters inherit his property. What Moshe Rabbeinu was unsure was, if this father is a Bachar, do his daughters get his double portion or not? Furthermore, along these same lines, the Yodeya Haya Moshe Rabbeinu Shemakoshesh B'misa. So also remember again, there's another story. There's a story of the Makoshesh Eitzim. This is the guy who literally again, who gathered or chopped down wood on Shabbos. So remember again, the pasuk says that they put him in jail because they did not know what to do with him. So the Gemara says they knew what to do with him. Moshe Rabbeinu knew that he was chayv a death penalty. So again, Shneimar mechala mos yumas avalo haya yodea be'ezo misahu yamos. Moshe Rabbeinu was unsure which death penalty he should be subjected to. In reality, this section should have been written just as a straight out section in the Torah, just as a straight out halacha from Moshe Rabbeinu. But the Makoshesh ultimately again was liable, and therefore again this section in the Torah was written corresponding to Israel. As we'll say, generally, the way laws are written in the Torah, it's a statement, it's a declarative. What the Gemara's point, what Shimon HaShemoni is pointing out over here is, interestingly enough, how these two episodes are written as stories. So Benos Slavchad, so they're privileged that this particular halacha is written as their story. The Makoshesh, unfortunately, again, is liable. So this particular story is written as his story. L'lamdecha. What does this teach us? Amud Beis, Lamdecha. Shemagalgalim schus ayidei zakai v'chol v'ayidei chayiv. It comes to teach us, I will say, that literally again, good things happen through good people, and bad things happen through bad people. That in other words, that Lamaisa, because Benos Slavchad were righteous, therefore they had the privilege of having this story of the inheritance written through them. The Makoshesh was liable, and therefore, unfortunately, he'd had this halacha written through his story. So now the Gemara will say, now why is this here? Besides that, it's interesting. What is the Gemara coming to teach? My kamistapkale. So the Gemara says, but if you hold, now again, if you say like what we said before, namely, that Eretz Yisrael is muchzak, meaning that when the Jews left Egypt, everyone who was entitled to a portion was considered to be in possession of his portion. Right? If that's really what you hold, then why was Moshe Rabbeinu unsure about whether or not Benos Slavchad got their father's double portion? Of course they got their father's double portion, because every Jew who left Eretz Yisrael was considered to be in possession of his particular portion. To which the Gemara says, no. He gufa kamistapkale. No. This is what Moshe Rabbeinu was unsure about. T'chsiv v'nasati osalachem morasha ani Hashem. The pasuk says, when speaking about Eretz Yisrael, I will give it to you as a morasha. Morasha literally means a legacy. I am Hashem. Yerushi hilachem me'avosechem. So on one hand, you can interpret that pasuk to mean that Eretz Yisrael is viewed as an inheritance that we received from our forefathers. Now, what would that mean? That would mean that the Jews who left Egypt were the owners of Eretz Yisrael, and we, the children who entered in, inherited from them. In which case, again, that would make sense. Then Chefer, when he died, was considered to be in possession of his portion in Eretz Yisrael, which then means that Slavchad, as the Bechar, got double portion in that. Old Dilma, the other possibility is Shemorisha ve'ena Yershin. Maybe not. Maybe the Jews who left Egypt, they bequeathed the property, but they did not inherit it, but they did not actually inherit it. So both say, so this is the ambiguity in the pasuk. How do we view the Jews who left Egypt? Do we view them as actually in possession of Eretz Yisrael? They owned it, and then they passed down those portions to their kids, or maybe no, they quote-unquote bequeathed it, but never actually owned it. Upashtelei tarvayu. And the ultimate answer is really both of them. Yerusha lechem me'avosechem, omorishan ve'inan yarshin. In reality, we look at Eretz Yisrael in both ways. On one hand, it's inherited and it's bequeathed. We look at it partially as being owned by the Jews who left Egypt. So Yerushalayim, in other words, we inherited it from our ancestors who left Egypt. Umorishan ve'inan yarshin. But yet our ancestors, those Jews who left Egypt, they bequeathed it, but they themselves did not actually own it. So I will say this is the ambiguity about what's happening over here. Which again, that's why all roads lead back to our original three-way machlokes. What was the relationship of the Jews who left Egypt to Eretz Yisrael? What was the nature? Did they actually own their portions, their familial portions, or not? Or maybe again, the Jews who entered into Eretz Yisrael, they're the ones who actually owned the portions, but again, there was just like this retroactive pooling and then reallocation. So in other words, this is what the pasuk means when it says Tivi emo v'sita emo bahar nachalascha. So literally translated, you will bring them and you will plant them in the mountain of your inheritance. Tivi enu lo ne'emar. So let's remember again, this is Az Yashir, sung by the Jews who left Mitzrayim at Yamsuf. So remember again, in the Shira, they don't say, you brought us, right? You don't brought us, lo ne'emar, elo tivi emo. You will bring them. Melamed shemisnavin ve'ina yodim ashnisnavin. Ma'nisnavin. So this is actually incredible. What the pasuk is highlighting over here is the Jews who left Egypt prophesied, and they didn't even realize that they prophesied. How so? That when they sang Az Yashir, they said, Chesh Baruch Hu, you will bring them to Eretz Yisrael. Now, who's the them? So now again, remember, this is at Yamsuf. So at Yamsuf, again, there was no Egel yet, there was no Meraglim. So as far as they knew, the plan was to fast track it to Eretz Yisrael. Prophetically, without even realizing that they prophesied, they said, you'll bring them. Them, a reference ultimately again to their children, but not them themselves. So you see, what the point the Gemara is making over here is, you see already like embedded in this ambiguity, or almost like contradictory nature. Who are the true inheritors of Eretz Yisrael? Is it the generation who left Egypt, and they're considered to be muchzak in it, even though they never reached Eretz Yisrael, but they're muchzak, they're considered to be the owners of the portion, or no, not the Jews left Eretz Yisrael, but the Jews, not the Jews who left Mitzrayim, but rather the Jews who entered into Eretz Yisrael. So this is our ongoing tension, and again, it has many ramifications. It has ramifications for how do you decide who gets what? And again, for Tzlafchad himself, so again, remember, when we say that Tzlafchad got a double portion as a Bechar, what did he get a double portion in? So if you hold that the Jews who left Egypt actually received portions in Eretz Yisrael, then it was muchzak, they're in possession of it, so then Tzlafchad would get a double portion of that. But if they didn't really own Eretz Yisrael, then what would Tzlafchad get a double portion in? What did he get a double portion? He'd get a double portion in his father's sukkah. Right, in his father's property that he owned at the time of his death. Incredible. So the pasuk over here says that Tzlafchad, the daughters of Tzlafchad, came before Moshe, Elazar Cohen, the tribal princes, and the entire assembly, Pesach Ol Moed. So, and then they asked their question. They said, "What should happen to our father's portion?" So the Gemara says, "Efshar amdu lifnei Moshe, v'lo amar lahem davar v'amdu lifnei asim v'chalei eda." So as I said, here's what's interesting. The pasuk reads a little bit strange, right? Because the pasuk indicates that they stood before Moshe, they stood before Elazar, they stood before the Nasim, and then they stood before the entire congregation. So what it sounds like is, they asked Moshe, Moshe didn't know, and they kept going down the line. So Moshe says, it doesn't make any sense. If they asked Moshe, Moshe didn't know, what? Someone else is going to know? If Moshe didn't know, someone else is going to know? What's going on over here? Ella, Saras HaMikra v'Darsheu di Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yoshia says, split up the pasuk and darshan it differently. Now what this means is, interestingly enough, is darshan it backwards. First, they went to some of the Rabbanim in the assembly. The Rabbanim didn't know. Then they went to the Nesiim. The Nesiim didn't know. They went to Elazar didn't know. And then finally, again, they came up the chain to Moshe Rabbeinu. So actually, darshan the pasuk backwards. So in other words, at first glance, their thought was not to bother Moshe with this, but to see again, maybe this question could be answered a little bit lower down on the leadership rung. But once the question was unable to be answered, they took it all the way up to Moshe Rabbeinu. Rabbi Eliezer. Other possibilities, we'll say, it's so beautiful. Everyone was sitting in the base medrash. So we'll say, by the way, can you imagine that base medrash? You walk into the base medrash, and Moshe Rabbeinu is there, and Elazar the Kohen Gadol is there, and all of the Nesiim are there, right? And the important members of the Eidah, and everybody's steiging in the base medrash. What a sight that must have been. So Benos Tzlafchad walked into the base medrash, and they kind of threw out the question in the base medrash. So everyone was present. So the Gemara says, "B'may kamiflagi." So I'll say, so now two different opinions as to how Benos Tzlafchad asked the question. According to the first approach, they started first, with some Rabbanim, and then Nisiim, and then Elazar, and then only finally Moshe. According to the second approach, they walk into the Beis Medrash, and they kind of put the question in front of everyone. So that's the machlok. This is very interesting. Mar Savar Cholkin Kav L'Talmid B'Makom Harav, Umar Savar Ein Cholkin. So we'll say it's an interesting shaila. Are you allowed to go ahead and give honor and respect to a student in the presence of his Rebbe? Right? So in other words, is it considered to be an affront to the Rebbe to give kavod to the student in the presence of the Rebbe? So this is the machlokes. So according to the first approach, so they would have held. So first approach says, for Benos Slavcha to walk into the Beis Medrash and ask everyone together, that would be an affront to Moshe Rabbeinu. Right? Because ein cholkin kavod l'talmid b'makom harav. You don't, if the Rebbe's there, you give complete deference and respect to the Rebbe and not to the Talmud. Second approach says no. You're allowed to be, in other words, you could give kavod to the Talmud in the presence of his Rebbe. Why? Because essentially, giving kavod to the Talmud is the same thing as what? Giving kavod to the Rebbe. Okay? V'hilchasa. And what's the halacha? V'hilchasa cholkin, v'hilchasa ein cholkin. That's interesting. So the Gemara says the halacha is you could give kavod to the Talmud in the presence of the Rebbe, and the halacha is you can't give kavod to the Talmud in the presence of the Rebbe. The Gemara says, okay, kasha hilchasa hilchasa. So what's the halacha? To which the Gemara says, hilchasa hilchasa kasha had de poligli Rabbi Yakara, had de lo poligli Rabbi Yakara. So everything depends. Does the Rebbe give kavod to his Talmud? If the Rebbe gives kavod to his Talmud, then it's okay for other people to give kavod to the Talmud in the presence of the Rebbe as well. However, if the Rebbe does not normally give kavod to the Talmud, then ultimately someone else can't give kavod to the Talmud in the presence of the Rebbe as well. So I will say a really incredible Gemara. So again, fundamental machlokes as to how Benos Slavcha themselves actually asked the question. So did they go one by one, starting with the lowest? And that's not an affront to Moshe Rabbeinu starting with the lowest, right? Because again, you don't go ahead and bring your kashrus question to the Gadol Hadar, right? So they started low, and then they worked their way up. That approach would hold that halacha l'maisa, it's not appropriate to give kavod to the Talmud in the presence of the Rebbe, as that is potentially considered to be an affront, ultimately again, to the Rebbe. Second approach says no. Second approach says they walked into the Beis Medrash and they kind of just threw the question out in the Beis Medrash. And who's in the Beis Medrash? Moshe and the Elazar and the Nisiim and the Eida, everyone's there. That approach holds there's no problem giving kavod to the Talmud in the presence of the Rebbe, because any kavod you give to the Talmud is also considered to be like kavod to the Rebbe. Beautiful. So I'll say a few more lines. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Tana, Benos Slavchad Chachmanios Hein, Darshanios Hein, Tzedkanios Hein. The daughters of Slavchad were wise. Darshanios means they knew how to darshan, they knew how to understand things, and ultimately they were righteous. So the Gemara says, what does this mean? Chachmanios Hein. Shalafi Shah Dibru. So I'll say, interestingly enough, why were they wise? Because they knew exactly when to speak. In other words, they knew exactly when to bring up this issue. How so? Listen to this. Rabbi Shmuel Silber, we'll say first wide line. So listen to this. The daughters of Tzlafchad, Dafka came when Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching the halachos of Yibum. Why would it happen by Yibum? Shneimar, ki yeshu achim yachdav. So I'll say, remember again. So what happens? So the Torah says, if brothers are alive at the same time, one of the brothers dies, ubein ein lo, and he doesn't have a son. So what's the halacha? The halacha is the surviving brother has to go ahead and marry the widow. So Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching the laws of Yibum. The daughters of Tzlafchad come along and they say, Amr lo. They said to Moshe, Im kiben anu chashuvin t'nalo nachlo. So if the daughter is the equivalent of a son, right? In this area of Yibum. In other words, so again, if you're going to tell me that because our father had a daughter, therefore our mother is not subject to Yibum, then treat us like a son and give us our father's inheritance. Im love, and if a daughter is not like a son when it comes to Yibum, then tisyabeim imenu. Then our mother should do Yibum. In other words, they said to Moshe Rabbeinu, one way or another, our family, right, there has to be a path forward. Either, if a daughter is not like a son for Yibum purposes, then ultimately, again, let our mother do Yibum. And if a daughter is like a son for Yibum purposes, then what? Meaning the presence of a daughter precludes Yibum, then give us our father's portion. Miyad, Vayakriv Moshe's Mishpat al Lefnei Hashem. Moshe said, oh, good kizot. It's a good kasha. It's a good kasha. Right? So now Moshe Rabbeinu brings their question before the Ribono Shel Olam. So that shows you that they were wise. I will say, by the way, a very profound yisod also, that in life, sometimes it's not about even like just about what you ask for or how you ask, but it's when you ask for it, right? That there's a timing for it. In other words, Tzlafchad had died sometime earlier, but Benos Tzlafchad were wise in terms of bringing up the question at this particular juncture. Next, Darshanios Hein, they were Darshanios, meaning they knew how to dash in the psukim. Shahayu Omros Ilu Haya Lo Bein Lo Dibarnu. Because they said to Moshe, had our father left behind a son, we wouldn't be coming to you. Because you recognize that if there was a son, what would have happened if there was a son? What would have happened? He would have inherited. And that would have been the end of the question. Vatanya Bas, but the Brisa says if there was a daughter. Rabbi Yirmiyah, Sami Kan Bas. No, take out Bas, it should read Ben. Abai Amrafilu Haya Ben Labas Lo Dibarnu. You know what? Beno Tzlafchad means like this. If we had a brother, even if our brother had died and left behind the daughter, we would not be raising our question. Rabbi said this goes back to what we learned in the halachos of Yerusha. Remember again, if there's a son, so the son's heirs have his inheritance position, right? So for example, had Tzlafchad died, right? If Tzlafchad had a son, right? And that son had a daughter, and then Tzlafchad's son predeceased him, and then Tzlafchad died. Who would inherit Tzlafchad? Who would inherit Tzlafchad? His granddaughter, right? Because his granddaughter would essentially have the inheritance position of his son. So the daughters of Tzlafchad say to Moshe, listen, had our father left behind the son, we wouldn't be raising this question. Even had our father left behind the son who died but left behind a daughter, so there was a granddaughter, we recognize that the daughter of our brother, in other words, our father's granddaughter, would inherit above us, right, before us, and we would accept that. The only reason we're coming to you now is because there's no son, and there's not even the offspring of a son. Said Kani, saying they were righteous. Shelo nisu ela lahagolan. It was very interesting. What does it mean they were righteous? That Beno Tzlafchad only married people who were appropriate for them. Now, we're going to talk more about this a little bit later, that Lamaisa, Beno Tzlafchad were encouraged to marry within their Shevet, to marry within Menashe, in order to ensure that the tribal land of Menashe would remain part of Shevet Menashe and not be dispersed. So now again, we'll discuss, was that a halacha, was that an obligation, was that an Eitzah Tova? We'll talk about that in tomorrow's daf, tonight, in tomorrow's daf. So the Gemara says, they only married men who were appropriate for them. Tan Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Omer, listen to this. They did not. The youngest girl didn't marry before she was 40. In other words, what does that mean? What does it mean they waited to marry until they were 40? They were very discerning in their marriage partners. So lest you think, very profound yisod, lest you think that a woman has to be desperate in her attempt to get married and rush, they were discerning. They were discerning, that they recognized that, again, even though they were going to marry within their tribe, they were very discerning who they married. And because they were so discerning, therefore they didn't get married until later. Until the youngest one didn't get married before 40. Here's the problem with that. Rav Chisda said, if a woman gets married younger than 20, she could have children until 60. Bas Estim Yoledes Ad Arbaim. She gets married at 20, she can have children until 40. Bas Arbaim Shuv Ina Yoledes. But if she gets married at 40, she's not going to have children. I will say, now again, what does this mean? Is this Chazal echoing what was conventionally held scientific, fertility wisdom of the time, or was this based on? Okay, I don't know. But Pashas, usually these kind of things are much more based on whatever was the conventionally held, scientific fertility information at the time. So what's going on over here? If they were 40 years old, then they wouldn't have children. Because they were righteous, ultimately, again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu performed the miracle for them, like He performed for Yocheved. So we'll say we're going to stop over for today. We're going to pick up with Yocheved tonight. Emir Tzashem is going to be part of tonight's staff. The point over here, I will say, you see, is that the daughters of Tzlafchad again were Chachmanios. They were wise in that they knew exactly when to ask the question. Darshanios, they understood based on the psukim their entitlement because there was no son or offspring of a son, and Tzidkanios, righteous, because even though they married later, HaKadosh Baruch Hu performed this incredible miracle for them. They were able to have children. Hosai, Shkoyach, to be continued tonight. A good night, everyone. All right, Chavranzim, have a great day, everyone. A good night. And how are you? Good night. How are you?
So.